What's up, everybody? Welcome into DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. My name is Jeff Spiegel. We are joined again by friend of the show, Lance Brozdowski, here to break down some World Series matchups, Yankees versus Dodgers. Lance, we had you on a few weeks ago. We didn't know if the Dodgers would have enough pitchers to get here, but here we are.
Yeah, this is a heck of a run by them. I'm partially surprised. I know they've been the favorite in the markets for a while, which is always a good way to kind of check your own feelings. But this has been an impressive run of stitching together some solid games with a pitching staff that has mostly been on the IL. So this is going to be a great matchup. I think it's a really fun World Series.
Yeah, and if you aren't familiar with Lance's stuff, he is kind of comes up through the driveline world and I would say pitching guru, ins and outs
Thank you.
on the nerdier side of things. But the reason I love Lance is because he's smarter than me, but he does a great job of explaining it in a way that people like me can understand. So when it comes to a matchup like this, where as Dodgers fans, we're not overly familiar with the particulars of some of the pitchers we're going to be facing, even if we've heard of guys like Garrett Cole, I was like, we got to have Lance on to talk about this. So let's talk starting pitching, Lance. If there's an aspect of this series that I think the Dodgers are at a disadvantage, it is starting pitching. In part simply because the Yankees have 4 of them and the Dodgers have 3 of them. That's a big reason why. But talk to me big picture about the Yankees starting pitching staff as a whole, and then maybe 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever, individual guys that kind of stand out to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the pitching matchup for me is you said it well. It comes down to the point that I've seen Mike Petriello of MLB.com write a bit, which is like this familiarity idea, right? Like we think about this in terms of why pitchers are pulled early and why leases are so short in the playoffs. It's just that hitters get comfortable when pitchers are seen multiple times. It's not necessarily a fatigue thing. You know, I think some people have proven this out. It's a pitch familiarity thing. And I think one of the oddities you see in the postseason, we're not seeing it a ton this postseason, but I think it's more noisy. But in the last, say, I think Petriello said the last 7 postseasons, you also have a reliever of familiarity. So if you see a reliever in a series a couple times, then that third time there's like an OPS bump in things. And I think what the slight advantage to perhaps the Yankees from the starting pitching standpoint here is that I think they'll give more leash to some of their starters, or at least be able to turn them deeper into games, such that you don't see guys like weird lefty Tim Hill or Tim Maiza, who they've done a really good job adjusting some things with. Luke Weaver, changeup guy, who's kind of been one of the focal points of this entire postseason from a reliever standpoint. You're not going to see those guys as much. So I would say the advantage is to the Dodgers the shorter the series goes, and to the Yankees the longer it goes, if that makes kind of any sense. But in terms of specific guys, I think they have some very different looks. Clark Schmidt is like a very crossfirey, classic Yankee type pitcher, which you see a ton in their minor leagues, which is like sinker, big sweeper. You know, obviously some minor split issues to lefties just because of how he works, but he has a cutter that he mixes in a lot, which is also really good. He made some adjustments this year that I think really unlocked him, and his breakout was one that I thought was coming last year and has come this year. Garrett Cole is his old self. Like he's been fantastic since the beginning of September. I think it's interesting. There's this concept I like talking about called like a punch in the face pitch, which is one that you're not throwing above like a 10% clip, but you're throwing it like between 5 and 10%. I like saying 10% is that window where hitters really start to care about an offering. Cole has this sinker that he used to throw. If you remember, the evolution of Garrett Cole was like, you shouldn't be throwing a sinker. And then he threw a 4-seam, and then he was the best pitcher in baseball for a couple of years. That sinker's come back. He brought it back at the end of the season and then he's throwing it in the playoffs. It's like a weird pitch that he's throwing in like 2-strike situations and non-2-strike situations as almost like a punch in the face pitch, just like a, what was that? I didn't expect the ball to run that much arm side. And those kind of pitchers, and the Dodgers have a lot of these guys that are more like mixed base versus a specific handedness, really, I think, match up well in playoff situations. And it goes for both sides. Dodgers with Buehler, Yamamoto, Flaherty, I think have a couple elements to this. And Cole, specifically with the Yankees, also has this element where I just don't think it's easy to prep from a hitter standpoint. You go with an approach, but if he throws that sinker, 2 times across 3 ABs and you just didn't expect him to throw to you, that's going to be an advantage for him.
Yeah, it's interesting what you said. We on our preview, I kind of talked about with our co-host. I said whichever team gets into the bullpen fastest in game 1 and game 2, I think is going to be key, because what you just described about pitcher familiarity is the entire reason why Dave Roberts handled his bullpen the way that he did in the NLCS and got destroyed in game 5 for not going to his bullpen. Why did you punt, etc. And I think if you got him in an honest moment, he would say, well, the reason is because when we're down 3-1 or 5-1, I didn't want to give them a look at Blake Trinan or Evan Phillips when I knew I was going to need those guys with as high a likelihood of success as possible in game 6, which is what ended up happening. And so I do think there's something to that. And the question then becomes, which team can get some of that length from their starting pitchers? And the Dodgers' default is going to be, hey, if we can get 5, great. Whereas the Yankees maybe have higher aspirations. So it will be up to the Dodgers offense to kind of level that playing field and say, man, if they could get to Cole in the first 4 innings and force him out of the game into a bullpen that I would say from the Yankees seems to be far weaker, not maybe far, maybe a stretch, but weaker than the Dodgers bullpen, especially if they get some guys back. That to me feels like one of the key matchups that we're going to see in this series.
I agree. Yeah, I think the Dodger bullpen is better. I would say that there are some matchup things with the Yankees back end, particularly with Tommy Conley, who you guys know obviously pretty well, and Luke Weaver, where they throw a lot of right changeups, both of them. And that is a pitch that is one of those interesting situations where if you look at like Dodger specific performance against that pitch, Ohtani does well, and I believe Teoscar Hernandez does well in small sample. But you have like a chunk of a bunch of other hitters, Will Smith, Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts in particular, that's always been a hack to get him out, to throw right changeups, where they don't perform well from like a contact quality perspective on this pitch. Like you're not going to give up a barrel most likely if you're throwing right changeups to any of those guys. And I think that makes for really interesting late game situations where a Weaver or a Conley might be pushed towards the end of the game to face some of the better hitters and just rip those changeups. And it's interesting from my perspective, from like the inner workings of a playoff series, because you have small sample where these guys aren't performing well, but like how confident are you in that small sample projecting forward? That is, I think, one of the biggest things. Like I look at the playoffs as like all these really small bets that organizations make. That's how I think of it, and I'm curious to see if the Yankees bet that guys like Mookie Betts and even like Teoscar, who actually is the only righty this year to barrel a Tommy Conley changeup. It's like, okay, is that predictive at all? Like, and what is he going to do in that spot with 2 strikes? Conley threw like 40 plus changeups in a row. He's probably going to do that again. He's pulling a Lance McCullers from 2017. But those inner workings of like, this team is bad versus this pitch type, so let's throw it, is something that both sides know. So it comes down to like, are you confident deviating from what they expect you to do, even if it's suboptimal, and how much of an advantage does that create? That's really what this all comes down to. I know it's like a much deeper layer than just like watching and enjoying postseason baseball, but that's like what I love thinking about and reflecting on too. It's like, what is Flaherty going to do versus the Yankees lefty bats with his four seam? He throws a lot of 4-seam fastballs. The Yankees destroy 4-seam fastballs. They're the best team in baseball, I think, since the beginning of August through the postseason against that pitch type. So like, I don't know. The Dodgers love count leverage, which I totally understand, but like, I don't think that they're going to be able to throw like 50% fastball to the Yankees lefties, like Soto and Chisholm, et cetera. It's just not going to happen. So what do you do instead? And if you're going away from the fastball and you lose count leverage, maybe you're walking more guys. And then that leads back to the point we were just talking about. Does the bullpen come in earlier, and how confident are they when you only have like one lefty and Anthony Bonda, et cetera? So it's really fun chess match. And I've been kind of thinking through all the iterations here.
I love it. It reminds me of Vientos when he came up and John Smoltz was talking, and he was basically like, I would just throw this guy all breaking balls repeatedly. And at some point you're like, all right, but like, then he's expecting the breaking ball. And then of course the Dodgers, I'm blanking on which pitcher exactly it was, throws him a fastball and he hits it for a home run. And you're like, all right, all sliders, all curveballs, like just don't throw. So I think that's the cat and mouse game of, oh, well, this guy stinks against changeups, but you can sort of Jedi mind trick yourself into, well, shoot, if he knows we're going to throw changeups and is expecting the changeup, then we come back and it's like, no, just do the thing that guy can't hit. Are there any other, because those are 2 great notes, Flaherty fastball versus the lefties in the Yankee lineup, and then the changeups against guys like Mookie Betts late in the game. Are there any of those other notes that you found as you're looking at this matchup of like, man, this guy's not necessarily a high leverage reliever, right? As Dodgers, we think of Adam Kolarek, who like was not a guy that anybody had on their radar. And it was like, yeah, but Juan Soto can't hit this guy. And so he became a huge story, So are there any other players that may play up because it's like, hey, this guy might not be awesome, but the one thing he does is going to destroy what the other team is trying to do, or vice versa? Is there a pitcher that we might be penciling into like, oh, this guy's filthy, we can trust him? It's like, actually, this is a bad matchup for him.
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of two lanes for that. The first lane, and I actually just made a video about this that is up on my YouTube, so I encourage you guys to check it out. I'll drop it in the comments below. I'll be down there, especially if anybody has questions or anything along those lines. I feel like I always get good engagement when I come on here, so I really enjoy talking to you guys. The first lane is off Buehler and Yamamoto, where they're both kind of inverted guys, where a guy like Yamamoto isn't as good versus right-handed hitters. So what he's kind of doing is mixing up a bit more. Early in the year, he was, primarily four-seam split. He started throwing a cutter, started throwing a slider, throwing a sinker. We saw all the iterations of that adjustment long term. So for him, it's like, what are you doing versus the Yankees righties for me? Where again, he leans on four seam. I think 40-ish, we'll say 40 to 45% of the time. And again, the Yankees, regardless of lefty or righty, crush four seam fastballs. So from my perspective, if I'm him, I probably want to lean cutter and I want to go split on those guys. But the problem with that is, again, back to the point of count leverage, both those pitches generally succeed because they're deep count pitches for him. So it's a matter of are you confident that you'd be able to get the Yankee guys to chase by moving off the four seam a bit more, dropping it down to league average in the postseason somewhere around 33, 34%. Do you want to bring it down there, or do you want to keep it up at 45%? And it may seem like really small pennies in terms of what we're talking about, but if you think of converting every 10th fastball back to a breaking ball, in a matter of 150 pitches, that's 15 less opportunities to do damage. Force teams give up the most damage. And it's the same idea for Buehler. It's just inverted a bit, where he's a little bit worse, in my opinion, versus lefties. So what does he do? My angle would be throw cutter, throw curveball, right? He's throwing around 45% four seam, 40% four seam versus lefties. And sometimes he pushes it higher, especially with that weird wind environment in Citi Field, which, again, completely baffles me in terms of how you analyze Buehler's last start
you were
in that
asking,
environment.
I think it was maybe Petrello that you were going back and forth, and you were asking about wind stuff and how this factors, and I'm like, this is a level of conversation that I don't have categories to understand even the beginnings of what we're talking about here.
Buehler, I saw Pitching Ninja posted a good nugget from him where he said the ball was just moving more, and it was moving a lot more, inverse Coors Field more. It was crazy. So he's just not going to have that movement when he pitches again. So that's, again, my perspective. Lefty, righty, fastball usage for Yamamoto and Buehler. What do they do versus the Yankees, who are really good? The deep game angle for the Yankees pen, as we're talking about against Dodgers, is that the Dodgers hit sinkers really well. And whether it be lefty or righty, they crush them. Mookie Betts down in, do not throw anything down in to him. So that kind of takes away, what do you do with a Clay Holmes versus him? Or even a Jake Cousins, who's this, again, sinker sweeper guy. He's got a really nasty sweeper. He throws this thing 70% of the time, but he often likes sneaking in these deep count sinkers. Is he going to do that, or will he turn into the sweeper version of Tommy Conley, where he's just throwing an 80% sweeper and it's hit it? Don't really care if I walk you. I'd rather you not barrel a ball. That's what every team is probably trying to avoid. And it's same with Ohtani, Tim Hill. I think he's a former Padre, right?
Yep.
If I remember correctly, yeah. You know him, right? Tanner Scott gave Ohtani troubles and DS. So I don't know the Tim Hill splits off Ohtani, but I imagine they're going to try to match him up there. Or maybe they go with a guy like Tim Meza, who's a little bit more vertical slot. Another guy with an interesting fastball. They made some tweaks to him. So can Ohtani get to either of those guys? And if they want to use Tim Hill throws sinkers primarily. I'm pretty confident Ohtani's able to cover lefty sinkers. But again, that's a weird submarine low slot. I don't know how Ohtani preps for that. Does he set up a pitching machine almost on the first base side of the rubber and just sees how that ball moves in on his hands and gets to one? There's a lot of these oddities that I'm curious to see. But late game sinkers versus the Dodger hitters, I think, could be a problem for Yankees. And I'm fascinated to see what the Dodgers do in terms of early game four seam usage versus either handedness, because the Yankees are terrifying against four seam.
I love it. Well, let me ask you before we go about a couple of the Dodgers starting pitchers. I think the two wild cards, it feels like, are Flaherty and Buehler. And I say wild cards, I mean, honestly, all three, Yamamoto as well. All three of these guys, we've seen them at their best this postseason, and we have seen them at pretty much their absolute worst this postseason. Flaherty, let's start with him. He's the game one starter. He goes 7 shutout. It's the best playoff pitching performance the Dodgers had. He comes back on, quote unquote normal rest. It's not Dodgers normal rest. It's everybody else's normal rest. The velocity is down, which has been a trend over the last month and a half or so. And he can't get any swings and misses all of a sudden. Was there anything in Flaherty's? I mean, again, I'm not trying to overanalyze a small sample size with, as you just hinted at, with some of the wind stuff. There could be other factors, but is there anything you can say to Dodger fans to make them believe that the Jack Flaherty we see in game number 1 is going to be a better version of the guy we just saw?
I think it would come down to what I've been kind of hammering here, which is like how much four seam are you going to throw? Like if he's sitting below 92, and pumping like 90, like I just wouldn't have him throw his fastball. Like I don't really know any other way to put it. And it comes down, I'm hammering this on this podcast, but like it comes down to the count leverage stuff. Like the Dodgers love throwing these four seam fastballs.
Count leverage, as I understand it, is just they want to get ahead of the count because when you're ahead of the count, the hitter gets put into an uncomfortable situation, more favorable outcomes. Is that a fair summary? Okay.
That's exactly it. The majority of damage in baseball is created when hitters are ahead of the count. So that's why, like, when you see 2-strike homers and stuff, like most of the time, if that's a good pitch, you kind of just go, okay, like the process there was good, the results weren't. But
the idea is that you throw fastballs that's the pitch that you are going to throw most of the time in the zone. So early fastballs equals guys just looking at it to try and get a feel or foul it off or whatever, and then you're ahead and then you're in control. It's kind of the connection between why the Dodgers might throw fastballs, even if you're just explaining. If someone's listening, like,
I get it. Thank you for checking me here.
Yeah,
no, it's exactly
crushes this pitch. Why are they throwing it at all? Because they can throw it for strikes, get ahead in the count, and then have an advantage.
And this is also why the Dodgers don't really elevate a ton, which I've definitely talked about, I think, to you in the past. Yeah. Like they're more of like an away four-seam team. They'll elevate sometimes. You see that with Buehler, deep count, etc. But they like that away pitch, again, because it's easier to put in the zone. You think of like natural misdirection. Say like Buehler's throwing to Stan, right? And he's setting up away, trying to dot fastball away. His natural miss is probably going to be to his arm side, so it's going to carry back into the zone and up. If he's like going up to Stan the entire time, if that miss stays the same, it's just going to rise out of the zone and likely be a take for a guy like Stan. So they're trying to get count leverage for the exact reason you said, to just not be in situations where hitters are probably gearing up to swing harder. The bat speed data Savant put out, we saw that in non-2-strike situations, hitters swing like a mile per hour harder. It's just like a fundamental thing. Now, each guy has their own kind of fingerprint, and that changes based on the individual hitter. But that's the idea. Again, from Flaherty's perspective, like, does he want to throw a 92 mile per hour fastball 45% of the time to the Yankees bats? Like, no, probably not. But like, is he going to be able to get away with like, does he want to go 30%? Like, does he just split it into thirds and go like curveball slider 33, which would be both bumps from what he does versus righties normally, and pull the fastball down? And again, like, can he get away with those pitches being in the zone enough such that he's not like 2-1, 2-0 on every guy? So if I'm the Yankees, I'm just trying to probably not chase, which is like this really easy thing to say, and it's substantially harder thing to execute. But again, from that perspective, if you're going up there as the Dodgers and you're like, we think they're not going to try and chase, they're probably going to look four seam in zone. It's like, if you could sneak some four seam by them, and just bet that it will work at the end of the day, that these pitches are better, which the Dodgers have continually done, then maybe there's ways around it. It's just, I don't know. I think we're going to see a lot of like early count curve stuff to try to get takes. That's something like the Astros have continually done. If you look at like swing rates on breaking balls in 0 counts, it's like oddly low, and it has been, and no one's really adjusted. So like Yamamoto, big loopy curve in 0 counts against some of these guys, like steal, get count leverage, and then kind of diversify and go in any direction you want. That's really going to be heightened, I think, in these situations. My prediction is that the Dodgers, I think, change their stripes and don't throw as many four seam. And then this probably comes down to how the relievers do, which I do trust for the most part. They have some fun guys that match up well. I think if you're going to have a guy throw a four seam a lot, I'll probably have it be Michael Kopech. I know the Yankees can catch up to Velo, but I just love that dude and I love what they've done with him. So he's such a fun pitcher to watch. So,
and it's also interesting. We talked a little, and this is way more on the surface level stuff, but the Yankees have some guys at the bottom of the lineup that struggle against lefties. But depending on if Alex Vesey is healthy or not for the World Series is going to make a big difference on whether or not the Dodgers can kind of capitalize on that bit of weakness. And I'm sure there's way more than just simply, lefty splits or whatever. But that feels like one more simple on the surface matchup that the Dodgers could potentially try to exploit if they have a second lefty in their pen that they could go to.
Yeah, it's agreed. The weird thing there is with Soto, though, like he's so good versus anything vertical that like I'm a little worried about like Vesey. I don't know if they've matched up at any points in their careers, but like I'd be a little worried about Vesey trying to throw like vert four seams from his slot to Soto. Yeah. Soto covers everything up so well, and he doesn't really swing down in the zone. So like I almost think I like Bonda there a little more, sliders down and stuff. Or you can even go with maybe like a weirder righty, like a Trinan is kind of an interesting matchup. That break on his like drop sweeper thing doesn't really line up with the bat path of a guy like Soto, who's probably more prone to hitting, vert fastballs and cutters out. So I actually like the Trinan versus Soto matchup if I was the Dodgers. So there's some like very specific things here that I find fascinating. And like I think the big thing too is like I'm running into a lot of situations. I imagine if you're listening to this, you're like, he's hedging a lot. And the reality is like that's not totally surprising to me because like I'm not someone who's in the box against these guys. Like if I was in a front office making some of these decisions, I would lean heavily on like my hitting department for what we're doing on the pitching side. Like I'd want them to tell me whether they see something with a guy's swing that makes them susceptible to this particular shape long term, such that we can like rely on this small sample information of like, hey, this hitter sucks versus sinkers more. Like that stuff is super, I think, valuable. I think the Dodgers do a really good job of that. I know they're one of the teams that pretty heavily relies on like edger footage, edgertronic camera footage, so like super slow-mo stuff where you can see like ball out of hand from behind home plate. So thinking about it from like the hitter perspective as to like every other edger setup you see, which is generally like looking at the pitcher's release. They're very big on like hitter visuals on pitches. And I imagine that stitches back to the fact that like you want to understand what the hitter's seeing. You know, you got to be confident enough in certain situations to almost deviate from what your stuff model says. Yeah. And I think the Dodgers are one of the best in baseball at doing that.
All right, let me ask you a weird question. Buehler, Yamamoto, and Flaherty. If you had to guess that one of those guys has pretty solid success against this Yankees team, and one of those guys might struggle more so than the rest, which guys would you put in those two buckets?
Yeah, I'm going to take Yamamoto to have success. I think that the splitter's a hack. You could get pretty much any hitter out in baseball. There's so few hitters that hit splitters a lot. If he can like lock that pitch in and like, I understand it's out of zone a ton, but if he could sneak 4-seam by away and like has good command in an outing, I could see him going 5 and king like 8 or 9, and with heavy splitter usage. So I'd go Yamamoto. The guy that I'm slightly worried about is Buehler because of the fact that like we've seen towards the end of the stretcher, like he hasn't been that great. The outing he had that was good was the outing where everything was moving more than it's literally ever moved for him. And I'm not totally confident he now goes back to is he the game 2 starter? No, it's Yamamoto game 2.
Game 3. So he'll
game
be
3. So in New York. I'm not totally confident there, especially given the fact that he's worse versus left-handed hitters with the short porch there. I'm not totally confident he's going to get out of that unscathed. Flaherty's probably more of like a neutral one to me, where like I think I'm pretty confident in him. It was a little weird for him to have that odd start against the Mets, and we talked about like some of the velo drops there and oddities. But yeah, my bets are Yamamoto deals and Buehler gets beat up, and then going from there. We'll kind of see. I'm always rooting. I don't have like a strong vesting interest in this game. So my rooting interest is always to go 6 or 7 games. I think like game 7s in sports are just the greatest thing in the world, which I apologize for anyone. I was about to say, if you're having a heart attack watching, I sincerely apologize for manifesting that.
If we're down 3-1 or 3-2, I'll be rooting for a game 7. Other than that,
exactly.
Have you made, I mean, I'm not going to force you to, but have you made a pick on how you see this one playing out as you look at things?
I haven't made a public pick. I don't really know where my lean is. I think it's probably towards I'll go Dodgers in 7, just to play off my angle of like wanting 7 games. I think it's tough. I think I do see some small advantages to the Yankees. I mean, if I was like handicapping this, it'd be like 52% Dodgers, 48% Yankees. I think it's a really good matchup. I know some other people are like ripping the Yankees for having a soft road, but like they're a really good offense. They have a really solid crop of starting pitchers, I think. And I'm kind of in on them as a team, almost from the angle of like me trying to buck the angle that everyone said the road was really easy, so it doesn't matter. But give me the Dodgers in 7. I can't pick the Yankees after I talk for 25 minutes on this podcast about the Dodgers, man. Come on.
I like it. Well, tell people, I know you've got a series preview that is, by the time this comes out, either up or about to be up. So tell people where they can find you, your channel, all that kind of thing.
Yeah, YouTube, Lance, Broz, first 4 letters of my last name. I do a lot of Dodger stuff because I just enjoy what they do on the pitching side. So there's a trove of videos I've done in the past that I probably promoted on this channel as I've come on. But I'll drop my subscription page or whatever it's called, channel page, there we go, on YouTube in the comments. And there should be a Dodger series preview up here. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for hopping on, Lance. We always appreciate it. Thanks to everybody for watching. Again, this is DodgerHeads presented by DodgerBlue.com. Subscribe, ring the notification bell. We got live content coming at you every night of the week throughout the World Series. So we'd love to have you with us. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody. As always, go Dodgers.